I always believed that the highways were my greatest allies. By countless journeys, they transported me from side to side of this country, witnessing my moments of victory, my hesitation, and even my failures. I never imagined that one day these same roads would be to turn my back. It happened in 1997, and to this day reluctant to talk about it. It is not a matter of embarrassment or fear of seeming insane, but every time I count, I feel a kind of presence watching me. Invisible, but as real as the engine of a heated truck under the noon. That year, I made extensive trips. I was used to staying weeks out, sleeping in tight booths, feeding myself in track ride restaurants, and exchanging pros with other drivers. Although it was an arduous life, I appreciated freedom. My main route was going from Vale das Veredas in Goiás to Porto Ruby, inside a distant state going through numerous highways. And that night, everything pointed to another common trip. I sat on the seat of my truck, turned on the engine, and tried to keep the fear under control while a warning feeling spread. I was always practical, and at that moment I appealed to my facet. Maybe it was just tiredness, I thought. Maybe my brain was preaching pieces, or the darkness was confusing me. If I continue, I'll find some direction, I whispered, trying to believe it was just a matter of patience. I took a deep breath, engaged the march, and followed. The silence seemed to be thickened, almost suffocating. The radio, which played perfectly before, now squeaking without stopping. I changed station, but nothing but static. I grabbed my old tape and put a country music tape, but the sound was distorted, as if it had been recorded in the bottom of a well. The road remained unchanged, straight with very high trees on either side. I peeled the clock on the panel. It scored 23:45, then 23:50, but then returned to 11:30 p.m. in an endless cycle. It was as if time was stuck in a trance. After a break that seemed infinite, I distinguished something ahead, illuminated by the headlights. A figure moving slowly on the shoulder. I diminished the speed, honked, thinking that he could be someone who knows the stretch. As I approached, a cold was taken over the cabin. That silhouette was a girl with a white dress, which was glowed in the light of the headlights. The long hair covered part of the face, and yet, just to see her gladly, a shiver traveled my spine. I stopped the truck, lowered the glass. "Do you need help?" I asked with a trembling voice. She stopped but did not respond, continuing on her back, immovable. I thought about going down to talk, but something said not to do that. The impression that the situation was dangerous was almost tangible. Then she gradually turned her face, revealing pale features and completely black eyes, without any reflection. For a moment, I believed it was a trick of light, but the smile that came up, shitting and discharged teeth, it touched the throttle deep without daring to look back. The more it advanced, the more it noticed that the landscape did not change. The same trees, the same shadows. And then she was there again, walking on the shoulder. This time I didn't reduce, I passed straight. When I looked at the rearview mirror, I saw that she was standing in the middle of the road, staring at me. Her black eyes shone unnaturally, reflecting the headlights. This is not real, I thought, feeling my heart beat my chest. I accelerated, but the feeling was that the truck did not gain strength. The road stretched out without signs, no bifurcations, without any signs of destination. After a while, I noticed a presence in the cabin. My whole body stiffened. I felt a deep chill. From the inner mirror, I noticed that woman sitting on the passenger seat, her face even closer, pale as wax. Dark eyes spiked in me. His lips moved, but no sounds came out. I crashed in fear, but as an instinct I made the sign of the cross and began to pray aloud. "Our Father, that you are in heaven." My voice was shaking but insisted, ignoring the approaching face. Suddenly, I felt the truck shake, as if it had come out of the asphalt. I turned the steering wheel and, when I looked back in the mirror, the appearance was gone. My muscles were all tense, and the air in the cabin was still heavy, almost breathable. I prayed softly, trying not to go crazy with the darkness around. The endless road seemed to keep me a prisoner. Without direction and with hope fading every kilometer, the only thing left was to move on. The panel clock was dead, and my stomach snowed as hours have passed since the last meal. It was then that, on the horizon, I spotted a weak, trembling clarity. A mixture of relief and suspicion dominated me. I accelerated, hoping it was any sign of life. As I approached, I saw an old gas station lit by a lamp at the entrance. The roof was in ruins, and a signing corroded by rust barely revealed that there was a company of an unrecognizable name. I parked and went down, even with instinct screaming not to do so. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own steps. I opened the door of the establishment, which ranged loudly as if protested against my presence. Everything there was bleak, eroded shelves, empty cans, and the strong odor of mold, suffocating. What caught my attention most, but was the counter. About him, a notebook of notes, yellowish pages, and in trembling letters the phrase, "You should not be here." A shiver ran me through me, and there was still more. Behind the counter I found a thermos. I opened, hoping it had water or coffee, but it was empty. A roll fell from the inside. The road never ends. Come back while you can. Terrified, I ran back to the truck. Turn the engine and accelerate seemed the only alternative. The weak lighting of the post disappeared behind me, swallowed by darkness. As I advanced, something even stranger started. The air was dense, and the engine sounded heavy. Suddenly a male figure appeared in the middle of the track, or something that resembled a man. He wore a dark suit and a hat that hid part of his face. It decreases the march, and when I was closer, it turned to me. The eyes were shining red, and a cold smile formed in his mouth. He raised his hand as if he ordered me to stop. Instead, I stuck my foot on the throttle. As he passed him, I felt a blow to the truck side, as if something dense had hit him. I threw a look at the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. After a period that seemed eternal to me, I spotted before me a portal of light, as if there was finally a breakup for that infernal road. But the end resembled a daydream. The clarity was so strong that I needed to school my eyes. As I crossed it, I returned to a known highway. The clock scored 10:30 p.m., as if time had regressed. I went down to inspect the truck, and in the bodywork, there was the mark of a printed hand on dust. Since then, I have never taken shortcuts. I told you to some colleagues, and many told analogous stories about that region. Even today, when I pass through BR 371, I avoid looking away. Each time I see a twisted tree on the bank, I feel my heart freeze. I don't know what really happened that night. Perhaps an exhaustion delirium, or maybe I really crossed a forbidden portal. What I know is that after that, the asphalt was never the same for me. The night was mild, clean sky, a gift for those who live on the road. I had left Serenova around 3 p.m., bringing a load of grain to Porto Ruby, a stretch that had done countless times, despite the malconcerted rides. It was close to São Gabriel da Mata on BR 371 when I received the tip of a mate via radio. "Hey Mauro, if you want to cut a few kilometers, enters that crooked tree there in the next corner and moves on, get out straight in Goldstone." At first, I hesitated. But tiredness beat me, and the idea of saving time seemed tempting. So I turned on the marked tree, entering a dirt road. The path was narrow, with robust trees on both sides. There were no posts of light, only the fickle shadows of my headlights. In the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. The radio still played country songs that usually pack us at dawn. But soon, something started to afflict me. It seemed that the air around me was muffled, loaded, as if an invisible force hindered there. I looked at the panel. The clock scored 23:10. On my account, it should be about 10 p.m. Maybe I had confused myself. I moved on, But something disturbed me, neither a single plate nor any sign of life. No shack, gate or distant light. A half hour later I passed a rough wooden sign where you read, "Welcome to Tapera Bella." The ink was peeled, and the plate seemed to belong to another era. I went on, but 20 minutes later I came across the same sign, identical, with the same sentence. Impossible, because I had not made any curve. I parked on the shoulder, turned off the engine, went down to breathe. The silence was so deep that neither insects or leaves moved, only a wind whistling in the middle of the trees as if whisper my name. I climbed back, determined to return, but the way back was plunged into a thick fog that was not there before. I chose to move on, because it still seemed even worse. The more it continued, the more the trees seemed to close, forming dark tunnels, while the wind gained an almost human sound, like unintelligible murmurs. The clock settled at 11:45 p.m. and does not leave it, although I had the clear impression that several hours passed. I tried to resist despair, but hunger and exhaustion consumed me. Suddenly, I spotted him again, the man with a dark suit, standing in the middle of the asphalt. This time, it was even closer. Her eyes, frighteningly rubber, pierced the darkness. I reduced, but I didn't stop. When he was a few feet, he raised both hands and murmured something inaudible but which reverberated inside my head, evoking long buried memories and people. I closed my eyes a second, praying to be illusion. When reopening them, the figure was gone. The truck continued, but the road seemed less and less real. The trees assumed anomalous contours, almost as if they had human features. Some seemed to face me, others raised branches that almost brushed the cabin in a macabre invitation. Finally, I saw a brightness ahead. At first, I thought it was another mirage, but coming close, I distinguished a village of few wooden houses wrapped in a witch fog. I parked at the entrance and went down. The place was deserted with gates and windows wide open, as if the residents had a hurry. In the center, I noticed a sloping chapel. I decided to enter. The Ranjou door denouncing years of abandonment. Inside, there were no benches, no altar, just a table with a lit candle. Beside the candle, a scribbled roll. "If you have come here, come back while it's time. We are no longer who we were." I felt a shiver of freezing the bones and backed away. Before leaving, I heard footsteps outside. I ran to the truck, turned on the engine and drew back without looking back. This time the trees looked less hostile and a contour of clarity began to form on the horizon. After a long time, finally, I spotted an illuminated post. The vision of electric light filled me with hope. I leaned over and went to talk to the attendant, a gentleman of tired but quiet features. I asked about the route. He made a strange face. "Where did you come from, boy?" I explained the shortcut I had caught. He widened his eyes. "That road has been closed for decades since the village caught fire. No one else passes by." I shivered in full. "But how?" "I was there." Before I continued, he added, "They say that anyone who gets on that route or doesn't come back, or comes back differently." I thanked. I returned to the truck and followed a trip. I never risked an alternative path. To this day, when I remember that dawn, I feel that something was left behind me, or worse, something followed me, waiting for the right occasion to reappear. That same year, my life was a routine without startled. He lived in a three-piece house on Timbauba Street, known for his peace and generous trees that projected pleasant shadows. My weekly schedule was simple. Every Friday I went to the center fair to buy supplies. This specific Friday, something happened that would make me review everything I believed. It was September, heat and humidity typical of the region. I woke up early to the sound of the maritacas in the backyard hose. The sun had barely appeared, but the temperature was already bothered. As I had my coffee with low-volume radio, I mentally listed what I would need to buy. Tomatoes, onions, meat, and some herbs for night tea. With my fabric bag, I left around 7:30 a.m., walking about 20 minutes to the central square, taking advantage of the morning breeze. On the way, I greeted Donna Helena, sweeping the sidewalk, and her Basilio, which pushed a wood of wood. All in usual calm, but there was a sense of expectation in the air, hard to explain, as if something was about to happen. The fair was already crowded. Marketers set up colorful stalls, and the sound of the voices merged with the birds and the noise of the wagons, a party of colors and aromas. I walked through the fruit newsstands, bought sleeves, bananas, and went to those of vegetables, choosing tomatoes, peppers. I passed a narrow alley, rarely noted, but that morning attracted my attention. I saw an old shed of exposed bricks and clay tiles, with an old sign where you read "Common Market." I was surprised. I had been attending that fair for years and never saw that space. Maybe it was recent. Curiosity beat me and I decided to enter. As soon as I surpassed the door, I came across an environment in dimness, in contrast to external clarity. View lamps hung from the high ceiling, and there were skylights where they filtered weak sun rays. The smell there mixed dried herbs, wet wood, and something difficult to identify, reminiscent of a newly opened solo. The place was surprisingly cleaned, with well-groomed newsstands in wide rows. Still, a nuisance took me. It wasn't just silence, but people's behavior. The salespeople, static, stared at nothing, not to mention. The few customers moved slowly, choosing products without emitting sound. I approached a very red apple stand, so bright that they looked painted. The seller, a subject of dark brown skin and grey hair, did not move. I greeted, "Good morning, how much are these apples?" He took a second before he answered, almost as if he had to trigger his voice. 10 reais to a dozen." His gaze was fixed, penetrating. I felt shiver. I thanked quickly and moved on, increasingly nervous. I realized something even stranger. The faces of each person there seemed vaguely familiar to me, but I couldn't remember where. They were not close relatives or acquaintances, but something in them sent me to distant memories, like old photographs. This sensation increased my discomfort. I tried to focus on buying other items, but the stillness and the eyes that accompanied me made it clear that there was something macabre happening. As I walked down the corridors, I heard a low noise like a collective whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind. However, I noticed that it was a constant murmur, like a prayer or song in an unknown language. I felt a pressure on the air, as if something tried to get involved. My heart fired. The environment seemed to compress my steps. The exit, which was near the door, now came much further, as if the corridor had extended. I walked quickly, almost running, ignoring the feeling that the sellers followed me with their eyes, or worse, with the mind. As I reached the door, I looked back. Everyone was immovable, but now turned to me. Their faces seemed devoid of humanity. Black eyes without reflexes, with empty expressions. I ran out without daring to look again, just stopping when I returned to the central square. I tried to tell some people, but no one believed. Some did not even know such a market. I came back there the next day with my brother, but the street was deserted. There was no shed. To this day, I can't understand what that was. Whenever I remember, I feel the hair on the back of my neck. I never assumed that something like this could happen, but in 2013, it happened to me and my family, when we moved to a tiny city in Minas Gerais called Cedros Sanctuary. To this day, I still wonder if it was all an illusion. I will try to be as descriptive as possible, although certain parts are still confusing to me. We arrived in town with my wife, my 2 children, and her grandmother, Dona Olinda. We lived in a simple house at the end of Rua das Paineiras, where there were only 2 other homes. The street was dirt, and the feeling was that the time there passed at a different pace. In the early days, nothing abnormal. We met some residents and made friends with their Crispim who lived next door. An elder of easy smile, wrinkled skin and white hair. It seemed to have a lot of history to tell. Always kind, I asked if we needed something. Hard not to sympathize with him. After 2 weeks, however, I came to notice a strange silence around his house. There was no TV sound, radio, pan. It always looked too quiet. I even thought it was my imagination. But this silence was beginning to take shape. One night, after an intense rainy day, I went to the porch, worried if everything was in order. The lights of his Crispim's house were lit, although it was late. I decided to pass there to see if I needed help. I waited, but no one answered. I peered out the window, and on the couch I saw his figure, head down, immovable. I tried to call him, but it was in vain. After much insisting, he slowly stood up and came to open the door. It opened with a smile without color, as if it were distant. It looked very pale, the opaque eyes. "Okay, you Crispim?" I risked. He replied in a monotonous tone, "I'm just tired, son." There was nothing else in that look, no trace of empathy or joy. It seemed to pronounce ready sentences. I returned home disturbed. The next night he disappeared completely. I do not speak of simply not appearing, I speak of a real disappearance. In the morning I knocked on his door, and nothing, nobody. I asked some neighbors, but no one knew. It was increasingly tense. Until, right to dusk, I looked out the window and saw something on the street. Crispim himself stopped at half-light of the pole, leaning into a cane. But his way of walking was uncoordinated, as if each step could make him fall. I opened the door to see if it was okay, but the moment you saw me, raised your face. His eyes were injected with a strange glow, and his mouth was open, as if he tried to speak, but without any sound. He then began to move forward, but his movement seemed wrong, as if the space folded around him. I couldn't even breathe. When he got close, he stayed before my house, staring at me with a look that froze my soul. Then he babbled something with a rough voice. "You shouldn't be here." I felt an unusual dread, and in the blink of an eye, he broke like fog. The other day, I went to his house again, but was locked, and everything seemed uninhabited. I went to talk to Donna Elvira, old resident of the neighborhood. "My son, Crispim, he died almost 10 years ago. It was buried right here in the local cemetery." My blood froze. It can't be. I spoke to him the other day. But Elvira insisted that I should be mistaken. I spent the following days asking around. Some swore he walked around the city at night, lonely. Others believed to see him in the square, silent and scary. Even more bizarre it was when I tried to visit the cemetery to find its tomb. I didn't find anything to indicate Crispim. I left with the clear feeling that it was observed. To this day, there is no explanation for what I witnessed. Sometimes I think I still hear shredded steps as he passed his house, as if something continued there, watching. All I know is that he spoke to me, and it was not a dream of a dream or daydream. My name is Letitia, and what I will report is not easy to put in words. I don't know if anyone will believe it, but it happened to me. And to this day, when I close my eyes, I feel the same cold that involved me that night. It was no nightmare or hallucination. That bath changed my life forever, and still fight to find some logic that brings me peace. I worked in a hospital in Villa Serpentina, a small town in the interior of Espírito Santo, where everyone knows each other. It was a monotonous routine, without great news. I got home after tiring hours, longing for a good hot shower. My house was an old but comfortable townhouse. The bathroom had a large mirror, always blurred by steam, and there was my refuge. That day, however, everything came out of normal. I closed my eyes to wash my hair, and when I opened them, it was no longer in the same place. The water was still falling on me, but it was icy, sharp, and the enclosure appeared to a bizarre decay. The walls, once white, were now covered with dark spots. The smell was strong, mold and something metallic. I tried to understand what was going on, but my voice was missing. I was looking for some known object, but there was nothing to do myself in reality. The silence taught me, but soon I started listening to whispers, voices that did not recognize from all sides, repeating indistinct phrases. I looked into the mirror, just to see my own squirmed face as if pulled away. I wanted to scream, but only a muffled moan came out. The feeling was that the space around me was out of plumbing, as if I were in a parallel dimension between lights and shadows. I tried to move my legs, but the air looked heavy like lead. Fear climbed the spine, every second more suffocating. It was then that in a flash of lucidity, I began to pray. Summoning God was my only board of salvation. I felt a growing resistance, as if every word of the prayer aroused an invisible fury around me. The shadows took shape, approaching. At each moment the place became colder, almost freezing. It was then that I saw something that almost made me lose reason. At the end of a dark corridor, a rusty metal door stood out. Unknown symbols were stuck in it. An impulse attracted me there, but an inner voice warned that I should maintain distance. It was late. I touched the doorknob, and a scream echoed out of nowhere, cutting the air. It was not a human cry, but a spectral roar that reverberated the walls, shuddering everything. The shadows grew, almost tangible. The house, or whatever that environment, began to swing. I closed my eyes in desperate prayer, and when I opened them, I was back to my panting bathroom with the hot water down my shoulders. My body trembled, and the dread dominated me. I looked in the mirror. It was my reflection, but my eyes conveyed something I didn't recognize. Since then, I can't face that bathroom the same way. The question is, what happened at that moment? I entered unintentionally in a forbidden terrain. Or does something come to me through that slit in time-space? Only God knows. Hello, people on Midnight Horse Channel, how are you? Today I bring a special account that my grandmother Donna Aurelia told me, and I thought you would appreciate. After all, I love sharing mysterious stories and wrapped in supernatural phenomena. I'm sure it will mess with you as much as it has moved me. I will narrate as if it were my grandmother's own voice, so as not to leave doubts about the strange details that plague it to this day. She said it was a stormy afternoon, one that doesn't seem to be in a hurry to pass. He lived in a modest little house in the heart of a mining village where life went slowly. The house, smelling of coffee and wood, was full of memories. That specific day, she was visited by a distant relative, cousin of the late husband, who came from another city bringing an unusual gift, a pocket watch, an old object with gold details, delicate dial and a metal chain inside a simple box. He said it was valuable, a family treasure. She, flattered, welcomed the gift, not sure how to use it. That same night, curious, she opened the clock lid and noticed that she was still. He decided to go rope, thinking that this was all missing. But as soon as he did that, the rain on the roof silenced. It was as if all the noise of the world was gone. She felt pressure on her chest, as if the air was denser. And then he realized that people in the next room, sister, a friend and a neighbor, were real estate with frozen expressions. Startled, she approached Donna Cecilia, her sister, but her eyes didn't follow her movements. He observed through the window, and the street was also stagnant, as if his time had frozen. She tried to move her legs, but felt like something arrested her. The only sound came from the gears of the clock, in a smooth, but at the same time, sinister. Feeling the fear growing, he looked at the display. The pointers spinned slowly, without corresponding to any time. With each turn, the house seemed to dive deeper into an uncomfortable dim. She wanted to drop the clock, but couldn't, as if her fingers refused to obey. Suddenly, that clock noise intensified, in a buzz that filled the air, making the walls vibrate. She felt a kind of strength sucking her energy, and for a moment believed it would be the end. Suddenly, a strong stalk made her wake up like a trance. Everything returned to normal. The rain proceeded, the sister moved, and the neighbor was talking. The clock, however, had stopped again, as if nothing had happened. What seemed to have lasted hours was, in fact, just short seconds. My grandmother kept his clock immediately, his heart fired, and since then it has kept it locked in a box, as it fears what might happen becoming a rope. I never knew how to say whether it was an outbreak or if the object carries any sinister power. She guarantees that time after that day never followed the same rhythm in that house. So that's it, guys. This story makes me goosebumps whenever I think of how time can be fragile and how much we don't know about it. My grandmother says that certain forces should not be caused, as they can open breaches for events outside our understanding. If anyone has similar stories, send it to Midnight Haunts. I am always attentive to everything that can reveal the hidden side of reality. If you like the account, leave your like, comment what you think, and subscribe not to lose anything. If you arrived until the end, leave a ghost emoji in the comments. So I will know that it is brave enough to face these stories to the outcome. And remember, who wants to further support our channel, become a member. This strengthens the family of Midnight Haunts.